Joining us this week for the Wednesday Bookmark is Heather MacAskill. As a wife, mom, educator, and author, Heather spends her life closely entwined with the lives of others, offering encouragement and hope in their circumstances. Born and raised in Southern Ontario, she now resides here in Ottawa. Heather, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Brock.
The book is called Enough, A Cancer Survivor's Journey from Protesting to Proclaiming. You begin this book in January of 2019. At the time, you had your dream job, yet you were feeling unsatisfied at that time in your life, you say. Take us back to 2019 and paint a picture of your life pre-pandemic.
I was teaching full-time. I loved my job. I loved where I was working. And I started to experience a little bit of dissatisfaction in it, which surprised me because everything about it was what I had wanted. And the Lord started speaking to me about taking another step into administration. And I promptly told him that was a terrible idea, that was not what I wanted to do at all. And he kept going with that, kept prodding, and that led to a process. I was about 9 months. There's a lot of coursework you have to take. But at the end of that 9 months, I ended up in administration and knew that was where the Lord wanted.
Fast forward to spring of 2020, of course, COVID hits. The world shuts down, you're working virtually, and you begin to notice some weird symptoms around that time that eventually led you to the doctor's office. Pick up the story from there for us.
We had just gone virtual right after the March break here in Ottawa, and I started noticing a lot of fatigue. I thought it was just my body adjusting to being on the screen all the time, all day, but it just would not go away. And then my right leg started giving me trouble, started having weakness there, and it actually led to the point where it would not support me. So I made an appointment for my doctor. She initially wanted a virtual appointment, and then when she heard my symptoms, she said, "Oh, maybe you should come in." So at that appointment, she examined me, and then it's very interesting. She printed off my whole chart and gave it to me and said, "You need to go to the hospital." She told me specifically, we have several here. She told me specifically which one she wanted me to go to, and said, "You need to go right there. Don't go home. Go straight there."
Wow. You finally get to go home after a very successful brain surgery. It turns out you had a brain tumor. We're skipping so much of the story here. And skipping forward to your follow-up appointment, you actually, once again, get some very shocking news. You thought everything's okay. The brain surgery went very well. Skip forward to that follow-up appointment with the oncologist and tell us the rest of that story there.
That appointment was done by myself. Everything had to be done by myself. Of course, pandemic, no one's allowed to come in with you. So I'm sitting there by myself with the oncologist. She's behind a mask, so it's a little impersonal. And she proceeds to tell me that, yes, the brain tumor was actually cancer. And it was stage 4. It was metastatic melanoma. I'd had a lump in my armpit that I discovered several months before that had been biopsied. And I'd been told it was benign, but that was a mistake. And so the cancer had months and months to progress and get worse. And she told me in that appointment, she finished it by saying, "Go home and get your affairs in order."
Wow, that's crazy. That's wild. And how did that strike you at the time? You must have been just so shocked because you thought the brain tumor's gone, everything's okay. And then it's just a simple follow-up appointment, right? And then you're feeling like, oh my goodness, like, because you hadn't even realized that it had come from this lump in your armpit that they had found, some time back, right?
Yeah, it was very surprising, and it was the bottom dropping out. It was shock. It was disbelief. It was a wave of grief and uncertainty that I was unprepared for in that appointment. And the emotion was really fueled by fear. A lot of emotions it was like a snowball. They started and fear just pushed that snowball down the hill, and they grew and they grew and they grew. There was anger there. I was angry that there was a misdiagnosis that allowed things to get so basically dire. And in that, I said to the Lord, "What are you doing? And what is going on? Why is this happening?"
And you do such a great job in the book explaining your emotions that you were experiencing during your time in the hospital leading into the initial brain surgery, and then obviously after getting this terrible diagnosis as well. One of those was loneliness.
Mhm.
And I loved the point that you made about finding others whose experience that you can relate to. In your case, a lot of encouragement came through someone named Nikki Hardy,
Mhm.
and you had seen her story initially on TV, actually.
Mhm.
What did you get from reading Nikki's book and listening to her podcast that you couldn't get from your family? Like, why is it important for those who are experiencing cancer to connect with each other?
I have a great family. My husband was very supportive, has always been, and my sons were very supportive as well. But at the end of the day, they didn't completely understand what I was going through.
Yeah.
And it's hard to explain the emotion of it, the uncertainty. That uncertainty just shows up, and it's like this uninvited guest that every time you open the door, it's sitting in the front door and you can never get rid of it. And in the journey, having other people who understood that uncertainty was what was very, very helpful. So, yes, I found her on the TV one night. I literally was shutting off the program I was watching, and there she was talking, and I was riveted. And that was really an answer to prayer because I had been praying, God, I need someone, I need some encouragement, I need someone who understands. And through listening, reading her book and listening to her podcast, that was real encouragement because she got it. And you really
Mm.
need to connect with other people who get it. During
Yeah.
the pandemic, there was not the option for support groups and things like that. They were all shut down. So it was important to find someone who I felt understood.
Yeah. I thought that was such a good point. And at one point, largely because you found yourself with a lot of extra time in your day to day, you decided to pray and ask God to lead you to something new. And this led to you writing a series of physical cards. And we just don't do that very often anymore, to people that you felt needed encouragement. Talk more about that experience, how you decided who to write cards to. And I know you prayed over what you were writing and so on.
I had time like I had never before.
Right.
Full time work is very busy. Teaching and then working in administration is a very busy job. It takes a lot of your time. But I suddenly had all day, every day, where I got to decide what I was going to do. And pandemic means you weren't hanging out with people either. So I was really on my own. And in that, there was a loneliness, but then also the Lord started speaking me to about how can I encourage other people, because there were other people probably out there feeling lonely during that time as well. And I decided one of the things that happened was I had received some notes in the mail that came to me just the right time that I needed them, and the encouragement. There might be a Bible verse in there, some encouraging words. And I thought, wow, how the Lord orchestrated that. He had to prompt someone to write it, and then it had to get in the mail, and then it had to get to me. And the mail was not always working the way it
Right.
should at that point. So, and it landed on the day that I just needed it. And I decided that, okay, I could do that. And so I started praying about people that I knew were going through things, or I would become aware of things, scrolling Facebook, someone was going through something, how social media connects us in those ways. And so I started writing letters to people, just little note cards, and I would pray over them before I wrote them. I would often include a scripture verse, and I would just send them off to people and say, okay, God, you encouraged me at just the right moment, so encourage that person at just the right moment.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And by the way, as it turns out, the oncologist was wrong. And there's a very interesting section of the book where you unpack that. In the interest of time, we're going to have to skip over that, unfortunately. But I would encourage people to buy the book to get the rest of that side of the story. Last question, though. You say that you intended this writing to, quote, allow opportunity for others to feel a connection, to bridge the gap of isolation that suffering brings. What do you want to say to that person, to that family listening who's in the middle of their own cancer battle?
Suffering can feel very, very lonely. And I want to say to people that Jesus can be enough for the journey, there was a battle for me to believe that and to come to be able to say that. I know it's a pretty bold statement, but I say it full stop, end of sentence, Jesus is enough. And I want to say to people who are experiencing the journey, whether themselves or as caregivers, that Jesus truly can be enough for absolutely anything.
Well, the book is called Enough, A Cancer Survivor's Journey from Protesting to Proclaiming, Ottawa's own Heather MacAskill. Lots more in the book that we had a chance to touch on this morning. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Heather.
Thanks for having me, Brock.